When I say Nintendo, do you think of Mario, Zelda, Metroid, or Donkey Kong? Perhaps you think of notoriously bad games like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Fester's Quest, or Dragon's Lair. I don't. I think about Mother. Not my mother, but the video game series which some of you might know as Earthbound. Earthbound is probably the only one of Nintendo's many games that has left a lasting effect on me well after its completion. First, a bit of backstory. The game's creator, Shigesato Itoi, was inspired by an accidental viewing of the Japanese horror film Kenpei to Barabara Shibijin, which translates as The Military Policeman and the Dismembered Beauty. More specifically, he mistook the murder scene in the film for a rape. So his games are basically horror, cleverly disguised as whimsical RPGs, filtered through the eyes of a child. And oh man, is the music flippin' weird. In a good way, of course. The composers of Mother and Mother 2, or Earthbound, are Keiichi Suzuki and Hirokazu Tanaka. Tanaka is a prevalent figure as far as music and Nintendo go. He played a role in designing and coding the NES and Game Boy audio hardware, and has worked on some of Nintendo's big franchises, such as Metroid, Kid Icarus, and Donkey Kong. The sound of Mario's footsteps and jumps in 1981's Donkey Kong, that was Hirokazu Tanaka. From the start, he seemed quite ambitious in his sound design and consistently pushed the envelope of Nintendo's hardware. He said, with older games, you'd have only one sound effect, used over and over, but if you listen to the sound of Mario walking, there are subtle variations. Before there was only one sound per action, but using the curve on a charge-discharge capacitor, I tried to change the sound according to the timing of his steps. There are many modern musicians, such as Super Powerless, Pixel Hate, and 8-Bit Weapon, that still use custom Game Boys to create chiptune music. So Hirokazu Tanaka may be the biggest pioneer of a whole genre of music that has been around for years, and will probably be around for many more. Keiichi Suzuki, on the other hand, is best known, at least in Japan, as the singer of the rock band Moonriders. The band have been going since the early 70s, and have had pretty regular album releases since then. They have some fairly interesting songs, and some pretty bland ones too. And check out this crazy tentacle microphone stand. Other than Moonriders, Suzuki has mainly focused on film scores. His last video game was Real Sound Kaze no Regret, an audiobook-style adventure for the Sega Saturn, which was ported to the Dreamcast in 1999. To say that the NES sound chip was capable of producing only 3 sounds at once, I think the composers did a brilliant job with this first game in the series. Unlike a lot of composers at the time who were creating more whimsical tunes for games, Tanaka and Suzuki were interested in recreating certain musical genres within the limitations of the NES hardware. A perfect example of this is the jazzy Battle with a Flippant Foe. I feel the composers could not have gotten a closer representation of wire brushes shuffling across a snare drum on the NES. Mother does stick to the main staple of all great JRPG soundtracks though, great melodies that never get old, even when they've looped 100 times over. Pollyanna I Believe in You is probably the most iconic of these tracks, and makes a return in Mother 2 and 3. Eerie Building fittingly marks the run-up to the first encounter with a Starman, part of Gigas' alien invasion force. The bizarre timing of the high-pitched drone mixed with the slow plodding of the bass reach Silent Hill levels of disconcerting. The same goes for the mishmash of major, minor and then dissonant harmonies in Factory Theme. The Mother soundtrack was recorded and arranged as a studio album and released by Sony. The album featured vocal arrangements created by various people, all of whom are pretty much unknowns in the music industry, with the exception of Michael Nyman, the minimalist composer known for his multi-platinum soundtrack to the film The Piano. Though the album is musically sound, with some surprisingly good production, on par with many of the 80s era bands at the time, It is let down by Linda Hendrix's insanely cheesy lyrics. It makes the album hard to listen to at times, and in the end, I much prefer listening to the original instrumentals. They have a bit more character to them. Maybe now you have figured it out. That's what being friends is about. When you need someone who feels the way you do, won't you think about me? Someone who can pick you up when you are blue? Don't you ever doubt me, I'll be there some way, somehow. That's what being friends is about. The audio experience in Earthbound gets interesting right off the bat. The opening scene with the meteorite crash is one of my favourite openings in video game history, and the sound has a lot to do with that. It's hard to gauge whether what you're hearing is part of the soundtrack or something the characters themselves are hearing as they explore the crash site. This carries through to other areas of the game, including some of the dungeons and caves filled with creatures corrupted by the evil of this alien invasion force. Often the visuals go hand in hand with the sound, such as the psychedelic backgrounds of the battle screens, or within Moonside, the psychic illusion town created by the evil Mani Mani statue. The jump to 16-bit was obviously great for such an ambitious musical team. The Nintendo SSMP, designed by Ken Kutaragi of Sony, was now 8-channel as opposed to 5. For a start, this led to more experimentation like in Caverns of Winters, which uses a sine wave with a gentle reverb curve alongside a theremin, perhaps to represent the sound of a starman clanking through a cavern. Tanaka and Suzuki could also continue to create more stylistic tracks such as the Bossa Nova Four-Side and Beach Boys inspired Summers through the more accurate representations of instruments, especially percussion. Suzuki has said he wrote over 100 pieces for Earthbound, a lot of which did not end up in the final product, which took up 8 megabits of the 24 megabit cartridge. The size of the soundtrack was a big contributor to the game's eventual transfer to a 12 megabit and then finally 24 megabit cartridge. There was no way the entire game could fit on the originally intended 8-bit cartridge. As with Mother, Suzuki would first compose on a synthesizer before handing over to Tanaka and the other programmers to create the sounds through the SNES hardware. Another album entitled Mother 1+2 was released on the Sony label in 2003, alongside Mother and Earthbound's ports to the Game Boy Advance. This album contains fantastic arrangements by Kimitaka Matsume of Jade Cocoon, Koji Kondo of Mario and Zelda, and Tomoko Kataoka of Make 10. I'd say this is the definitive Mother album, with its beautiful use of Music Box on Mother Earth and 8 melodies, complementing their melodies perfectly. There's its quirky culmination of brass and acoustic guitar counter melodies at the end of On Its Theme, and I couldn't think of a better use for the kazoo than playing the main melody in Saturn Valley's theme. It's everything an arranged album should be, and I'm glad they scrapped the vocals this time around. Tanaka and Suzuki could not return for Mother 3 due to their work on other projects, so Shigesato Itoi gave the composer position to Shogo Sakai. The game remains Sakai's biggest undertaking in composition due to his leaning towards sound design and the fact that the game contains 276 audio tracks, an insane number for a Game Boy Advance title. More recently, Sakai has composed the music for Kirby and the Rainbow Curse, which is the only other title in which he is credited as the sole composer. 2 arranged albums for Mother 3 were released on iTunes, Mother 3i and Mother 3 Plus, and they're both a bit disappointing. The instrumentation is nowhere near as gripping as Mother 1+2. It goes for a more epic, fully orchestrated feel, which falls flat due to the lackluster production. The Black Mages released their first set of Final Fantasy arrangements in 2003, so by this time there really was no excuse for some of the MIDI instruments, especially the drums used in these albums. Each of the games in the series have some kind of musical theme running through their storylines, and in the case of Mother 3, the gameplay. In Mother 1 and 2, the character must collect melodies hidden around the game world. These magical melodies both drive the story forward and act as the power required to defeat the main antagonist, Gigas. The character Ness has an affinity for rocking, as this is one of the default options when the player is asked to pick their favourite thing at the beginning of Earthbound. In Mother 3, the developers added a timekeeping element to the battle system. Players can now attack up to 16 times, as long as they time their button presses with the beat of the music. Many of the bosses in Mother 3 have unique rhythms which must be matched in order to execute multiple attacks, and these rhythms can be heard more clearly after putting them under a sleep status effect. This tie-in of music and gameplay is one of the main aspects which make Mother 3 match the greatness of Earthbound. Occasionally, the compositions live up to the strong visions the original composers had for the series, again with stylized tracks like the Tango and El Mariachi, and bizarre experiments in sound design and odd timing like Blip Blip High Score. Overall though, if we're talking about the soundtrack alone, I'd have to say Mother 3 has the weakest and most forgettable soundtrack of the three games. The songs loop more frequently, and the military-style motif from Piggy Guys is severely overused. Mother 4 is, or was, a fan-made game which has been fully supported by the original Mother developers. As of 2019, however, the game has been rebranded, mainly due to Nintendo themselves sending multiple cease and desist takedowns to other fan-made games such as Pokemon Uranium. At this moment in time, more than 10 years after the Mother 4 project began, it has yet to be unveiled what the new name of the project will be. One thing we do know is that the soundtrack, created by Shane Mesa with input from Danny Persson, has been completed and is available to hear right now, and it is awesome. If you've been following the retro perspective for a while, you might know that the first video I ever uploaded was an interview with Shane and Danny when they were in the process of writing the music. According to the rebranded Mother 4 Twitter account, this music has been fully licensed to appear in the reimagined game, if and when it ever sees the light of day. Details on the game itself are still extremely scarce, but enough about that. How does the music shape up? Well, right off the bat, the mood and aesthetic of the Mother 4 soundtrack matches the unique and often eerie feel of the previous Mother games. There's a perfect blend of old school, nostalgic, crunchy 8-bit sounds and quasi-realistic samples, all produced in a far more polished and modern way than its predecessors. Take Onamewa for example. Its main melodies are played by very dry percussion, interjected by the far more spacey organ and theremin, which have the track bouncing between mischievous and mysterious. The track It's Gotta Be You takes a similar approach to instrumentation and production. Percussion and brass take turns on the main melodies, while reverberous harp, organ and theremin play simple arpeggios or short phrases further back in the mix, under most of the track. This is a perfect musical portrayal of the setting of the Mother series, because in every town you visit, there's always something going on under the surface, something alien. Shane Mesa has borrowed some of the more iconic elements of Mother's music in other tracks, such as the glitchy trip-hop style drum beats in Battle Against a Faraway Foe, and also experimented with odd timing and tempo changes in Où Allez-vous. There are also those moments of pitch bending into a dissonant chord scattered throughout the soundtrack. Shane and Danny said in my interview with them that they worked closely with Mother 4's creative director, and it's clear that all three of them had a definitive vision of how the music should sound. Shane also worked on sound design for the project, but it's unclear at this time whether his sound design will be included in the game anymore. Despite Mother 4's tumultuous and downright confusing development cycle, my hopes are high that the Mother 4 team can reinvent the series with their new project, and at the same time show Nintendo that people do actually want another Mother. This important, groundbreaking series as a whole is everything Nintendo should and could be. The creative minds behind it were visionaries, and the composers and sound designers had a massive influence on the tone, story, and even the gameplay of the series. Be sure to keep an eye out for more Mother 4 news, and definitely check out the interview with Hirokazu Tanaka that I've linked to below. The highlight of the interview being when he explains that in the early days of Nintendo, they weren't interested in sales figures or appealing to the West. What Nintendo did was make great games. I've been Jake of theretroperspective.com. Cheers for watching, and I'll see you next time.